evening I have a topic that I wanted to speak about, as we are already on the end almost of the commemoration of the tragedy of Karbala. And obviously the event of Karbala is not just limited to the day of Ashura, or even up to the point of Arba'in. As we know, in a few days, in a week, 2 weeks, the millions of people will be gathering in Najaf to walk to Karbala, to pay their respects to Sayyid al-Shuhada and the other martyrs of the tragedy of Karbala. And so this evening I wanted to tie in an event and look at the contemporary relevance of it in our own personal lives. And that is the topic of answering the call of Sayyid al-Shuhada, but through the personage of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, Ajalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. And so we know that, and I'm sure we've heard the maqtal, we've heard the story of the day of Ashura and what Sayyid al-Shuhada had gone through. And you know, there came a point on the day of Ashura when all of the family members obviously had been killed one after the other, where the companions had also laid down their lives on the day of Ashura. And a point came where Sayyid al-Shuhada was literally alone, other than the fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, who, as we know, was sick in the tent, and that even was out of the wisdom of Allah to protect and safeguard the imamate, as Sayyid al-Shuhada himself would mention in one of the talks he gave. On that day, as Sayyid al-Shuhada looked at the empty tents, and he saw that everybody had been killed, and only the women folk remained, and again only the fourth Imam or the Imam to be was remaining, he mentioned a statement, and it's narrated in different ways, but the gist of it is where he had said, "Hal min nasirin yansurna." And he went on in a few different statements, but basically the gist of it was that, is there anybody out there to come and help us? And now we know that there was nobody left on that day. And so scholars give us two perhaps rationale of why Sayyid al-Shuhada made this statement on that particular afternoon of Ashura. One of them, we are told, is because he wanted to complete the argument. He wanted to basically leave no ambiguity in the enemy forces, that up until that point they had done all that they wanted to do to the family, to the companions. And so Sayyid al-Shuhada was giving them one final opportunity, that there was still a possibility of redemption, that they could still lay down their arms. They could still cease and desist in this war, in this very one-sided war, in this one-sided battle. They could submit, they could ask for forgiveness, and Allah potentially could forgive them and accept their forgiveness for what they had done. But as we know, when he made that call, nobody from the enemy forces acknowledged it, accepted it, and obviously they went on to mock and eventually to even kill Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam. But more than that, at the second level, and what I want to look at tonight is the ramifications, is the importance of this call as it pertains to you and I. Scholars tell us that that call was not just for that era, for those individuals, but they say that that was a call for perpetuity. It goes on until the end of time. It was a call that Sayyid al-Shuhada had given, where he was looking for help, but it also relates to us in our own day and age. And so I want to look at very briefly tonight, how does that call of Sayyid al-Shuhada on the 10th of Muharram in the year 61, almost 1400 years ago, how does that resonate and relate to us in our own day and age even today? Before I go to the practicality of it, you know, when we look at the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, all of the 12 Imams and the 14 Masumeen alayhimus salam, we realize from the hadith that they are one nur, they are one light. They're not like 12 light bulbs scattered about, right? No, they're actually one light. And although they're one light, but we tend to look at them sometimes as a community, as individuals. And so sometimes, and this is one of the travesties of justice and the outcomes of history, is that when we look at two Imams, for example, we tend to look at them at a different perspective. So let's say we look at Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhimus salam, the two Imams. We look at the older brother, Imam Hassan, and we say, well, he signed a peace treaty. Why did he take that route? Whereas his brother, Sayyid al-Shuhada, he went the route of this revolution, this war that he launched. And then sometimes we'll compare them to, let's say, the 5th and the 6th Imam, and say, well, they were intellectuals. They led an intellectual revolution in Medina. They didn't rise up. They didn't go that route. And one of the travesties of justice and one of the disservices that we as the followers of these Imams do is when we try to compartmentalize these Imams, where we try to say, well, one Imam was an intellectual, one was a revolutionary. One was one who had a peace treaty, one was one who waged silent protest in the form of the supplications, as with the 4th Imam. But we have to realize, as I said, that they all come from one light. They are one light. The challenge is how we look at them. Right? We have lights in this room, or we have light bulbs at home. And if you look at the light bulb from a different angle, you'll get a different amount of light from it. If you look at a light directly, you'll get a certain amount of light. If you look at a light and you're 30 feet away, the light obviously dissipates. It's not as bright. And so when we look at the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam, we have to look at them in the correct understanding that they did what they had to do in their own circumstances, in their own time that they lived in. But if you were to replace any Imam with another Imam, they would fulfill the same role as that Imam. And so as our scholars give us the example, Imam Hassan and Hussein, peace be upon them, you switch their roles and they would have done the exact same thing as the other would have done. Had Imam Hussein been at the time of, let's say, the 6th Imam, had the roles been reversed, then Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq would have launched the revolution against Yazid. And Sayyid al-Shuhada would have been the one who would have taught the community and educated them as the time of the 6th Imam. So if we appreciate that they are from one light, they all come from that one light of Allah. Allah created, as we even read in the Ziyarah al-Jami'ah, where the 10th Imam says that Allah created you as one light, and then He spread you out into different anwar, into different lights. We realize that they all come with one mission. Their goal is not only limited to the Imams or even to the Prophet of Islam, but rather their mission goes back to the very first of creation, which is Prophet Adam, peace be upon him. And so let me go from there and to look at a bit more about the similarities that I want to touch upon tonight. As I said, that although they come from that one light, although they are equal in that way, but between the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, we sometimes see a very close relationship, a close familiarity with one another. Although they are brothers or they're the sons and they have that family relationship. But if you look at the ahadith, and I'll just give you a few examples tonight, we see that out of the 12 Imams, between the 3rd Imam and the 12th Imam, there is a very close relationship that exists between them. Although they come about 200 years after the death of the 6th Imam, but yet there is a very close bond and a tie between these two Imams, to the point where if you look at all of our religious occasions, or if not all of them, a majority of them, anytime there is a remembrance or commemoration of, let's say the Shuhada, there is almost always a mention of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. Or the other way around, you look at the 15th of Sha'ban, where we mark the birth of the 12th Imam, and the recommendation is to be in Karbala on that night. You look at the day of Ashura that we just marked a few weeks ago, and the relationship there, we see that when we greet one another, Addamallahu ujurana wa ujurakum, we make this supplication to one another. And then we say in the context of that dua, of that greeting, of that offering condolences, that may Allah make us amongst those who are with the wali, with the authority, with the heir, to avenge the blood of Karbala. You look at Friday, the day that is the day of the return of our 12th Imam, and we're advised to recite the dua of Al-Nudba. And even within that context of the dua of Nudba, there is a remembrance of the tragedy of Karbala. Not only the tragedy of Karbala, but the one who will avenge the blood of Karbala. And we have that beautiful line, Aina talibu bidamil maqtuli bi Karbala. So we see that, and these are just a few examples, but this continues down the line, that in almost every occasion of the remembrance of Karbala, there is a mention of our 12th Imam. And it goes also to the end of time, meaning that we believe that when the 12th Imam's return takes place, we believe that he will eventually have to die, whether a natural death or he is a martyr, he becomes a shaheed. But we believe in our theology that only an Imam, an infallible, can bury another Imam. And so our scholars tell us when the 12th Imam leaves this world, the one to give the ghusl, to bury him, to give the kafan, to recite the salat al-mayyat, will be Sayyid al-Shuhada, that he will be brought back alive in the Rajat. And so again, there is that relationship that after the death of the 12th Imam, Sayyid al-Shuhada buries him and he begins his governance over this earth. And so with this, we see the relationship that exists between them from the historical perspective, from the commemorative experiences that we engage in, but it has to go deeper than that. As I said at the beginning, when Sayyid al-Shuhada made that proclamation on the day of Ashura, is there anybody out there to come and help us? It was not just a call for 1400 years ago. It wasn't just a call for his time or for a certain era. Actually, it goes up until the end of time. And I'll display this in the lines of a few of the lines of the ziyarat that we recite to Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salatu wassalam. Salu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Many people from this community and from around the world will be gathering in Arba'in, in Karbala for the Arba'in in about 2 weeks to come. And whether we're blessed to go in that journey or if we go at another time of the year to Karbala, we know that the books of the ziyarat and the supplications, they have certain words that we recite to the Imams, these ziyarat, these certain phrases that have, for most of them, been taught to us by the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam directly. One of the things that I want to always emphasize and I want to mention tonight is the fact that the ziyarat, the visiting of these shrines, is not just a formality. It's not just we go there, we touch the dhari, that we recite a few words from a book, and then we go on and go to the next haram, to the next shrine, to the next shrine, and then come back home. Actually, the words that we recite, if we pay attention to them, if we don't understand the Arabic, then again, we should always make an effort to read the translation. Ideally, we should learn, obviously, first and foremost, we should learn the Arabic. We should make it a point to learn the language, at least the minimal that we read when we go to these shrines. If we can't learn it, we should read the translation and then begin to internalize and reflect on the words that we say. Because we will see that the ziyarat are not just a greeting. It's not like when I come to your house or I come to see somebody and I say, "Hi, how are you? How's the weather?" That small talk that we make. Rather, the text of the ziyarat are, in many cases, a comprehensive lesson in knowing about that individual. So you look at any of the Imams and the ziyarat that we recite, we talk about who they are, we gain some ma'rifat, some knowledge of that individual, of their history, where they come from, what their challenges were, who their adversaries were, and then we go on to speak about their merits, their greatness, their worth in the eyes of Allah. And in many of the cases, we also begin to make a promise and a pledge to that Imam. We begin to make a promise to them. And this is where the scary part comes in, that we're saying things to the Imam. And God forbid if we're standing in front of the dhari. I picture myself as an example that if I'm standing in Karbala, and if I were to say certain words to Sayyid al-Shuhada or Abu al-Fadl Abbas, if I were to be at that level where I could hear a response from the dhari, as many of our ulama have recounted, or we hear these tales of them being responded to from the haram of the Imam, if we were to hear back from that Imam a response to what we were about to say, or what we were saying to the Imam, we would have to ask ourselves that did we actually mean that statement? Because it's easy to say, "Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah," greetings be upon you, as a very crude translation of this phrase. But when we get into the crux of the ziyarat, where we begin to make a promise and a pledge to the imams, this is where it becomes a bit more difficult. Maybe for myself, maybe not for all of you, but for myself, that are the words that I'm about to say, do I actually mean them to the imam? Let me just give you an example for tonight, just 3 or 4 lines from one of the ziyarat that we have that is mentioned in Bihar al-Anwar, that Sheikh al-Mufid also mentions, of the ziyarat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And just look at the words of how we address the third imam. Again, keeping in mind that how do we respond to his call on the day of Ashura through our 12th imam. In the ziyarat we say the following, we say, In lam yakun adraktu nusrataka biyadi. That Imam, if I was not able to help you directly on that particular day of Ashura. Right? So we're making a firm understanding that we weren't there on Ashura. We weren't there to heed the call, to answer the Imam, to pledge our loyalty when he asked for that help. And then at the next line, we begin to make that statement, which again is a very difficult statement to make if we understand the words, and if we're ready to live up to the commitment and the promise that we're making to the Imam. In the next line we say, فَهَا أَنَا ذَا وَافِدٌ إِلَيْكَ بِنَصْرِي. I wasn't there 14 centuries ago to help you, Imam, but today I stand here and I'm ready to give you my assistance and my support. Now, what kind of a support would we be telling to the Imam? 14 centuries later, there's no battle happening as it happened on the day of Ashura. There's no war happening on the plains of Karbala that we can see in our eyes. But we're telling the Imam, I'm ready here now, and I'm ready to help and assist you. The Imam in this ziyarah gives us a response of what kind of help he wants from us, and what kind of a help we are promising to the Imam. And we say in the next part of the ziyarah, قَدْ أَجَابَكَ سَمْعِي وَبَصَرِي وَبَدَنِي. Then I am answering to you. My hearing is answering, my sight is answering, and my entire body is answering to you, O Imam. Now that may be easy because you can say, well, my ears, if we mean I'm answering the call of the Imam by my ears, I'm keeping away from the forbidden. I'm not going to listen to things like ghiba, like people who backbite, who talk about one another in the community. As we know, the sin of ghiba is one of the worst sins in the Quran. In Surah Al-Hujurat, chapter 49, Allah speaks about ghiba as if you're eating the flesh of your deceased brother. And as Allah says that you abhor this action. And so maybe when we tell the Imam that my hearing is submissive to you, is answering your call, I'm telling the Imam I won't listen to the haram, I won't listen to the forbidden music, I won't listen to people gossiping about one another in the community. We tell the Imam, my eyes are also answering your call. Maybe this could be an allusion to the fact that I'm not going to look at the haram, right? I'm going to keep away from looking at the prohibited. And it's a challenge in the societies that we live in where men and women both don't dress appropriately. Thank God that we have snow in Canada, because if we didn't have snow, we'd be full of sin the year round. But at least those 5-6 months of the winter as it is today, women have to cover up. They wear a toque, they'll wear a scarf, they'll wear gloves. And we're telling the Imam, my eyes are in control, are submitting to you. Right? That means even online, when I'm on the social media, I should be careful of who I friend on social media. What am I looking at on Facebook, on Instagram, all of these things. And we say my entire body is at your service. It gets a bit more challenging as we make this ziyarah, because it's hard to control the ears to an extent, but you can control what you listen to, because you can turn the radio off in your car. But then the eyes, you have to keep eyes open when you're driving, when you're walking down the street. You can't always control what you're looking at or what is in your field of vision. So it becomes a bit more challenging. And then the ziyarah says, my body is in your service. Now that becomes a bit more difficult. Especially we live in societies, and if we work in the corporate sector or we are involved, we have to sometimes maybe take a client out for a meal at a restaurant. Or if we're friends at university, we go to the bar maybe. We might not drink, but we go with our friends sometimes. So now we're telling the Imam, even my body is going to be in your service. It becomes a bit more difficult going down the line. But then it becomes even more challenging, because after the body we say, وَرَأِي وَحَوَايَا, that my opinions, my thoughts, my desires, these are also in the service of the Imam. How do we control our thoughts? That's a challenge. I don't have the answer tonight to give in the next few minutes, but it's something for all of us to think about, that how can I control the thoughts that go through my mind, my opinions, my whims and desires. This is a challenge for everybody, is that Islam tells us one thing, and the society we live in tells us something else. Our marajas say one thing about the religion, we read the rulings, and sometimes we say to ourselves, well, this scholar lives thousands of kilometers away. What does he know about my situation? I think that this should be the way I do things living in the West. Maybe we've come across this and we've thought about this ourselves. We'll say, well, the Marja says this, but I think it should be like this. In essence, we are not submitting to the Imam, we're submitting to our own thoughts, our own desires. And we have to be careful about that, because obviously in the time of the ghaiba, the occultation of our 12th Imam, we don't have any other valid or worthy alternative other than following a marja, taking his opinions, his research, his analysis, and basing our lives on it. Now that doesn't mean they don't make mistakes. They might be wrong in their judgment, but we have an opportunity, we have the right to go and ask the scholars questions. We have the right to present our scenarios to them of our life, our challenges, and say what is our responsibility in these particular areas that we go through in day-to-day life. They won't change the rules to suit you and I. It won't be that I give them more khums and they'll change the ruling. No, but they will be in a better perspective. They'll have a better perspective of the situation, and they will hopefully be able to reanalyze the situation and come up with a ruling that would be acceptable, and obviously something that we will be able to submit to. And so in the ziyarah, we tell the Imam that all of this is in our submission to you, O Imam. And again, keeping in mind that this is being addressed to Sayyid al-Shuhada. But the ziyarah doesn't end there. If it were only up to that point, we could have used the excuse, well, you're no longer alive, Imam. You were killed 14 centuries ago, so this is only pertinent to those people maybe who were at the time that you lived and who spoke to you. They were submitting to you as the Imam while they were alive. But the next line of the ziyarah shows us that it's a comprehensive pledge, an allegiance that we're giving not only to Sayyid al-Shuhada, but if this ziyarah, for example, came at the time of the 5th Imam or 8th Imam or 10th Imam, any companion who read it would be obligated to read the next line, which would have tied them to a bond with the Imam of their time, just as we have an Imam for our time. And the next line says the following. It says, وَلِلْخَلَفِ الْبَاقِي مِنْ بَعْدِكَ, that this what I'm promising, that my body is in your submission, my sight and my hearing and my body and my thoughts and my intellect are also for those who would come after you. The 4th Imam, the 5th Imam, all the way down to the 12th Imam. We then say that we address them in the following. وَالْأَدِلَّاءِ عَلَى اللَّهِ مِنْ وُلْدِكَ فَنُصْرَتِي لَكُمْ مُعَدَّةٌ, that not only you, say the Shuhada, but all of those that come from your lineage, the Imams from your progeny. Because we believe from the hadith that the Imamate continued in the line of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And there are hundreds, not just one or two, but there are over 140 hadith from the Prophet and from the early Imams that told us that the Imamate would continue in the line of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And so we make this pledge that the Imams that come from your progeny, that my help and my assistance is there for each and every one of them. And so, again, as I say, that if we go to Karbala or any of the sacred shrines, and we make this kind of a pledge, just imagine for a moment when you go for the ziyarah that you hear a response back from the dhari of that Imam. The Imam says that you just promised me your eyes, your ears, your body, your thoughts would all be at my service. Now I want you to live up to that pledge. How would we actually now respond to the Imam who is buried in that dhari? Right? It's something that we have to really wrap our mind around and our head around. That we make the ziyarah not just a stop, that we go to a few shrines, we say a couple of things, and then we go into the bazaar and go shopping and we come home. We're making a pledge with the Imam that we're going to see, and as an extension, the Imam of our time, that we weren't there on the day of Ashura. We weren't there on the 19th of Ramadan when Amir al-Mu'mineen was struck in the Masjid al-Kufa. But we're here today to answer his call. We weren't there when Imam Hassan alayhi salam was poisoned by his wife, when he was poisoned in such a way that his innards were coming out, where he was vomiting up blood. But we're promising that we are there for the 12th Imam. We weren't there in Karbala. We weren't there to help Sayyid al-Shuhada when he made that call. But we're saying when we go to the ziyarah of any of the Imams, that we will be there for the Imam of our time. And so let me end with this point and conclude that the ziyarah is not something that we have to take, that we should ever take lightly. The ziyarah is a renewal of the pledge, of the covenant that we have to the Imam. And when we go to the haram, when we go to the shrine, when we begin by even asking permission to enter the dhari, as you know, there is a special formula to recite where we ask permission from Allah, from the angels, from the Prophet, from the Imam. We ask them that, Adkhulu ya Rasulullah, do I have your permission to enter, ya Rasulullah? Do I have your permission to enter, O angels? We have to begin from even that stage and think about the ziyarah and be serious about it. You know, I'll give you one story and conclude with this, that many of our great scholars, like Allama Majlisi, that they mentioned that when he would leave Isfahan to go to Mashhad, he would get to the main gate and ask the permission to enter. And one of the stories mentions that he was only going to be in Mashhad for 4 or 5 days. He got to the main door, he recited the permission to enter, and he says, I didn't feel in my heart that the Imam was responding to me. So they say he went back to the Mehman Sarai, you know, the guest house, the hotel he was staying in. He stayed there for 1, 2, 3, 4 days, just engrossed in dhikr of Allah, in remembrance, in crying, in trying to connect to Imam Rada alayhi salam. And he says that on the last day before he was going back to Isfahan, he went back to the haram, he recited that line to enter the shrine, and he felt that change in his heart. And then he walked into the courtyard, walked to the shrine, he recited the ziyarah, did the 2 rakat prayer, and then he went back to Isfahan. The point being is that he didn't feel ready at that time. He got to the main door, but he still felt, you know what, I've rung the doorbell to the Imam, but he didn't respond to me yet. I'm not ready to go and meet my Imam. I'll go back home and work on myself, and then I will try and muster up the stamina and courage to go and meet Imam Rada alayhi salam. And so when we go, we have to go with that same mindset from here, before we board the plane. Get ready, get into the mood of asking Abu Abdullah for the permission to enter his shrine, which is literally his home. Ask Abu al-Fadl Abbas, ask the Imams in Kadamain, in Samara, ask Amir al-Mu'mineen in Najaf, that I'm coming from far away. Do I have your permission to come and enter your shrine? And if we start from here, and during the entire journey we keep with that thought and that intention in mind, then when we get there, hopefully we would have developed the spiritual courage to go to the shrine and ask that permission. And maybe if we're at that level of some of those scholars and urafa and the mystics, who when they go to the haram and to the dhari of the Imam, and they ask and they say salam to the Imam, that they get that response, maybe we will also be at that level, that we will hear that response coming back from the Imam, that I've heard your appeal, and I've accepted you to come into my home. And so welcome into my home. That's the ultimate goal that we seek. And ultimately, obviously, if we can do that, then we will be ready, hopefully, to wait, to actively await for our 12th Imam, and to be ready to help and assist Imam al-Hujjah when he returns to bring about a reformation and a rectification upon this earth. Let me conclude with one or two words about the shahadat of Imam Hassan alayhi salam tonight. As we know, and I mentioned in the beginning, what we have many different riwayat, many different hadith about when the Imam was killed. Many of the historians, including Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi in Muntaha al-Amal, he mentions that the most reliable date is the 28th of the month of Safar, but also the 7th is also a reliable date. And that it was in these days that Imam Hassan alayhi salam, after being the Imam for 10 years after the shahadat of his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, that he faced in that 10-year span challenges which were at the most, one of the most difficult of any of the Imams. Again, they're all Imams and they all have difficulties. But the challenges of Imam Hassan alayhi salam were such that after he signed that peace treaty with Muawiyah, that treaty which was a difficult treaty to sign, but he knew that in that lied the preservation and the safeguarding of Islam. It got to a point that when he would walk in the streets of Medina, that people would insult him. They would insult him with the most disgusting of words. You know, he was the grandson of Rasulullah. According to the Quran, he was the son of Rasulullah. But when he would be walking in the streets of Medina, people would greet him and they would say, Assalamu alayka ya mudhill al-mu'mineen. Greetings be upon you, O the one who brought humiliation upon the believers. Greetings upon you, the one who insulted, who was a humiliation upon the community. Because they saw his peace treaty with Muawiyah as being a form of degradation, of humiliation. And Imam Hassan alayhi salam would reply, not with evil, but with kind words. And he would tell the people that if I had followers that could help, I would have taken a stand against Muawiyah. And he gave the example of what Khidr had to do. He gave the example and said that just as Khidr did all of those things of putting the hole in the boat, of killing the child, of building up that wall, that there was a wisdom behind it. He says, there was a wisdom behind what I had to do. That this religion was going to falter, it would have been destroyed under the Banu Umayyah. And because I knew that there was not enough support to build this religion and protect it, I did what was in the best interest of the ummah. Not that he was worried or he was scared about his life. He knew he would become a shaheed, whether it was on the battlefield or whether by poison. And eventually that was how he died. Historians say that at least 2 times in his life he had been poisoned by enemies trying to get rid of him. He had been stabbed countless multiple times. And each and every time it was obviously not his time to die. But eventually his own wife was bribed by Muawiyah. She was told that I will give you 100,000 gold coins and the marriage of my son Yazid if you kill your husband Hassan ibn Ali al-Mujtaba. And unfortunately, as we know, the historians mention that a poison had been ordered from Rome, a poison which was so severe. And as Imam Hassan was fasting in the hot days of the months of that year, that he took a drink as he had broken his fast, he began to drink of that drink his wife had given him. And in that sharbat, in that drink was a bit of that poison. And almost immediately we're told that Imam Hassan realized that this was the poison that would end his life. And as he was sitting on his deathbed, as his body began to change color, as we're told that his body began to change a pale color of yellow, as the poison began to go through his body, his brother Imam Hussein alayhi salam comes to near his bed. Imam Hussein comes to sit near the head of his brother Imam Hassan. Imam Hussein kisses Imam Hassan between the 2 eyes on the forehead. He begins to cry and lament. He begins to grieve over the state of his brother. He sees Imam Hassan, the poison going through his body. Imam Hassan has a little pot behind his head. Imam Hassan brings the pot and begins to cough up blood into this pot. Imam Hussein sees the state of his brother and he begins to cry profusely. He begins to grieve and lament over the tragedy of Imam Hassan. Imam Hassan turns to his brother Abu Abdullah Hussein and he says, "Oh Hussein," he says, "don't worry about this." He says, "Don't grieve." He says, "Don't fear." He says that it is as if I see the people on that day that you will die. He says, "I see the 30,000 people as our grandfather has told us. That 30,000 people will gather to shed your blood. That 30,000 people will come to kill you. It's all of them seeking proximity to Allah and to the Messenger of Allah." And as Imam Hassan that says that there is no day like your day, Ya Aba Abdullah. And in this way, as Imam Hassan and Hussein have that final embrace, as the Imamate transfers over from Imam Hassan to Imam Hussein, as Imam Hassan's body begins to leave, the soul begins to leave the body, Imam Hussein begins to say that famous line of Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, that indeed we all come from Allah and back to Allah is our return. Imam Hussein gives his brother Imam Hassan the last rites of the ghusl. He shrouds him in the kafan that had been brought from Jannah. He gives his brother the camphor that had been brought from Jannah for Rasulullah, and he buries him Jannatul Baqi. But at least, brothers and sisters, we know that at least Imam Hussein was there to give his brother Imam Hassan that last farewell, to bury him in the graveyard of Baqi. But we remember Abu Abdullah Hussein alayhi salam, when his son Imam Zainul Abidin had been in the difficulties on the day of Ashura, that he wasn't there to be able to give his father Imam Hussein the last rites that he deserved as the father and as the Imam of the Ummah. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. We ask Allah by the right of Fatima and her father and her two sons that Allah accept this act of worship from us tonight. We ask Allah to allow us to see the time of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah. We ask Allah to give the thawab of this majlis tonight to all the believers who have lost family and loved ones wherever they may be. Especially we ask Allah for the majlis for tonight to be given to the thawab of the late Muhammad Iskandar, whose commemoration of his shahadat is marked tonight. We ask Allah to grant him a great place near the Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt alayhum salam. And we ask Allah to grant all of the shuhada who have lost their lives in the safeguarding of this faith the highest of ranks in the company of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. For the thawab of the marhumin, of the deceased from our family, our community, our friends, the ulama, the shuhada. Surah Mubarakatul Fatiha. Before that, one loud salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.